the chairperson of this session, Professor Dhaneshwar Sahu sir, the chief architect behind this webinar series, Professor Ganesh Prasad Das sir, my co-speaker, Professor Vijay Nayak sir, senior professors attending this webinar, Dr. Sachindra Rao sir, Ranjit Ghosh sir, Kailas Das sir, and other senior professors, my friends, faculty members, the coordinator of this webinar, and all other participants and dear students. I should thank at first the organizing committee for showing confidence in me to deliver a lecture in this ICPR sponsored webinar on the occasion of Indian Philosophers Day. Well, I have come up with the topic, is man mortal? I'll be looking into this issue as to whether man is mortal, as to whether man is moral. Now, though the question, is man moral, looks very simple and common, but giving an answer in a strict affirmation or denial is very difficult. That is, we cannot accept a strict yes or no to this question. So this leads us to question the moral status of man. Now, when do you say a man is mortal? I don't know why mortal is coming from my mouth these days. When do we say man is moral? Maybe when we see a sort of a right behavioral pattern or a right attitude in him or a right thought in him or the way he speaks. Maybe this would help one to declare somebody as moral. And again, if a man is acting or if a man acts as per his knowledge that is considered to be right, then we do consider the man to be moral. So even sometimes we say, when man obeys the rules that we have in the society, or when man makes right choices and does what that is right and avoids all that is wrong, then we do call man moral. I don't know why mortal is coming from the mouth this day. So we say man is moral. And again, we say when a man is moral, when he has a capacity to anticipate the consequences of his action. He carries an action, but at the same time he is conscious about the consequences that will come out. Or say, even he is conscious about the statements that he makes. Or if a man is concerned about protecting the rights of persons, or he never makes a sort of discrimination while dealing with people, or when he promotes the ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity among the fellow beings, then we say, well, the man is moral. So this is the basic structure in our understanding in asserting as to what morality means and what are the things that need to be considered to say that man is moral. If we go by the social contract theory that advocates that moral behavior is that which promotes social cohesion among the people and enables everyone to lead a good life. So leading a good life, not individually, but ensuring a good life for all others around, maybe is the basis of morality. Now, if we look into the past, 100,000 years back, if you go to that level, when man was a hunter, food gatherer, we see him that he was concerned about himself. He was selfish. He was hunting food, or he was hunting animals for food for himself. But the initial seed of morality was laid when man made a transition from I to we. It is the initial seed of morality. When man made a transition from I to we, there is I is lost in we. Man then tried to live in small groups. And with time, over the years, these groups have expanded, and we have come across societies, say the civilized societies that we have today. So this is the transition. Now, in this society, in the modern societies that we live, why there is a talk of being moral? What exactly it is? Now, why do we want to lead a moral life? Certain answers make surface up. Maybe we want to lead a good social life. We don't want to be an antisocial. So obeying the norms of the society, obeying the rules that are prevailing is to have a coherence with the society and with everybody. So in that way, we will be defending our morality or our moral sense. Maybe if we look at this from a psychological angle, most of the time, 90% of our thinking goes like this: what others will think. We are not concerned what we think, we are more concerned what others think. So this also, well, to some extent is useful, because when we think of what others think, we are careful about our own reputation. We don't want to destroy our reputation. The reputation matters. So in order to protect our reputation, we obey to the norm. We obey the norms. We go by those norms. And why we obey the norms in the society, the principles in the society, and another reason being that from the psychological angle is that maybe we may be facing a sort of social censure. In order to avoid social censure, maybe we need to go by the norms. And one more thing, most importantly, is for obeying the norms, the frameworks that we have in the society in which we live, there is a conscience in us. And morality is very much natural to that. We have a definition of morality that is external maybe, and we try to impose it on us. But the real fact being that man is, well, though it is said man is selfish, I don't deny that statement, but man is also naturally moral. It is only because when he extends outside, he gets carried out by the external situations, he loses his morality and then tries to define morality for himself. There lies the problem. So if a man goes by going by one's own conscience, he is also defining, in a sense, what morality is. And one more thing, well, I will not touch that, but still, in societies where we live, there is a divine assertion. Maybe if we don't go by the norms, if we don't go by our inner conscience at least, maybe we will be facing the punishment by some unknown force. I don't say divine here. Maybe we will be facing some punishment from the unknown source. So that's how also we refine ourselves. We try to keep ourselves committed to certain patterns, certain aspects that we consider practicing, which would account to what is morality. So now the question comes, what sort of actions do we consider moral? Now, human beings, as I said earlier, there is no denial of this fact that man is selfish, but oh, 1 second. Hey, Donald, should me just 1 second, please. Some technical issue. Should me the screen will pay the. Yes, yes, back. So some technical issue now. What sort of actions do we consider in order to consider man as moral? Now, human beings are carried by their own self-interest. But if there is no appeal to one's own self-interest and the self-interests are sacrificed for the common good or the good of the community, maybe we are on the moral path. And again, whatsoever action that we carry, the motive behind, the intention behind the action is also very important. And the actions that we carry should have a social acceptability. Having said this, sometimes our actions may not be socially acceptable. Maybe the society, being guided by some ignorance, some forces of ignorance, may be denying our course of action, but in that situations we have to come up with certain justifications, certain reasons to assert to the community how that action is not immoral. So a social approval in the action is required. At the same time, there may be actions which may have no social approval, but to carry in action which your conscience speaks of, but at the same time, in order to make that socially acceptable, you have to define the way it is justified to have that action and such an action and how such an action is moral. And above all, we should be carried more by our conscience. So taking everything into consideration, we have societies where we have enough rules, enough norms, enough principles. We all know that. It's not that we don't know what is truth, we don't know what is ahimsa, not that. It's not something like that. We know the principles. But what is the problem with the modern man is, he does not translate his knowledge into action. There lies the problem. There is a gap between theory and practice. There is lot of theory, but that theory is not put into practice. Why? Probably the selfish interests, maybe the self-considerations are given primacy over the community feeling. The modern man is more committed to his own interests. Though it commits a lot of damage to the society, he is not concerned about that. It's not that he is not aware of the principles, not that he is not aware of the laws, but the selfish interest having a preponderance over the social interest that he carries on certain acts. So here lies the problem. Here we have to address that there lies a huge gap between theory and practice. And here lies the whole problem. And today, the maxim, the survival of the fittest rules. And there is an utter competition among individuals for land, capital, wealth. And in such a state of affairs, a strict practice of moral principles has really become difficult. Has become really difficult. But as I said to you earlier, the element of morality is there in man, but it is somehow covered by the external manifestations in man. So the role of a moralist now is a bit changed. A moralist, while framing out laws or theories to be practiced, should be aware of the practical side of those principles. It is only then there would be a less gap or no gap between theory and practice. Framing a principle, well, it's easy. Well, I can frame hundreds of principles, we can frame hundreds of principles, but how far do we practice them? That becomes a question mark. So, while practicing, or sorry, when framing theories or laws or moral theories or moral laws, care should be given as to how far they are practical. And there lies the success of the moral theories or the principles. Now, one more position comes to the fore here. There are people who say that man has conscience. Well, the intuitionists, they say that theories are not at all required for leading a moral life. Man is by nature moral. He has his own definition. He has his own understanding. No moral theory can ever change him. He is great gurus, the great rishis. They have maybe without any specific scripture in hand, maybe they have realized the ultimate. Maybe. And I will not talk of the ultimate. At least they have lived a very moral life. We do see in the society people who have not been taught of any moral theory, but still they are found to exercise morality. They are found to exercise what would fall under the scope of morality. So two positions I clearly see that on one hand we say that study of some scriptures or some moral principles is needed for morality, number one. On the other hand, no study is actually required to exhibit a moral to exhibit a moral principle. No, to exhibit a moral behavior. So a tussle between the two, and an intermediary position that I see between these two positions is that it is always good to have a moral principle. It's not bad to have a moral principle. You have a moral principle in hand, but how far we are able to translate that moral principle to practice, how far we are able to convert that moral principle in our actions, that matters most. So it is not about having a theory or not having a theory. It is much about the practice. It is all about practice. So it is the practice which finally everything, all sort of knowledge, everything finally resorts to what sort of practice that you carry on, what sort of practices that you have. So finally everything, the moral question finally resorts to the final activity on our part. Now, even though we have a defined moral principles and moral structures, and these moral structures do not have a sort of universal approach. They may differ with societies, and even within the society, they may differ from individual to individual, because the level of applicability of the moral principles differ from person to person. We cannot hit a universal principle in the sense we cannot make a moral principle universal in the sense we make a scientific law universal, because of even though there is an understanding of the moral principle, but the applicability differs from individual to individual. So such sort of universality cannot be claimed, at least in the moral domain. That's what the problem the modern period has got. Now, if we raise a question, how to then make any sort of moral principle universally applicable? Now, some may come with a suggestion that a sort of sanctions, a sort of punishment may force somebody to act moral. But that is an external sanction or punishment that would not, in a long run, be taken as a solution. It cannot be taken as a final solution to uncover the morality that is already there in man. The sanctions may for a time being mold a person. Well, these days there is a checking of wearing the helmet and mask. We don't. We know it's a norm that we should obey, but we don't. But at a distance, if we are informed that the police is checking, we wear it. So that is not defining ourselves. We are not that. If we are on to a moral way, external sanctions cannot define our morality. For a time being, it may appear as if we are moral, but in real fact, we are not. So, if at all a question of morality is raised, it has to be shaken, it has to come out from inside. The cover that was there on it has to be unfolded. It is only then the moral roots can be touched at. Now, if we look into the Indian scheme of the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali, and I don't want to go for the 8 steps. At least for claiming morality, we can look into the first 2 steps, Yama and Niyama. At least if we are able to practice these 2, we are on the moral path, already on the moral path. But how much we practice these is a big question mark. There is a lot of theory in this, and this has been given to us not today, it has been given to us centuries before, but how far we are up to this? Even practice of Yama and Niyama has become difficult for us. And how can we claim morality for man? If we look into the restraints in the form of Yama, we have 5 restraints, and in the last lecture, truth has been discussed as a cardinal value. If we look into the first restraint, which is truth, we know that truth ultimately triumphs. There is a victory in truth. And even though the world is guided by falsehood, ultimately it is the truth that has to come out. It has to surface up. Because the more you cover the truth, the more clearly it surfaces up. The more we cover truth, the more explicitly it surfaces up. This is the truth in truth. We may be going with falsity, but it will not last long. A man practicing falsehood has to construct a system of falsity in order that his falsity is not caught. So he becomes the bondage for his own considerations, and finally he will be caught someday. So the entire system of falsity will break up, will break down. So it is truth, which it is the truth, the ideal of truth that has to be practiced, and which we don't, I say with strong conviction, I say. I don't say we don't practice truth. Well, we practice truth, but whenever there are instances which affect our own self-interest, we commit not to speaking the truth, not to go by the truth. That's why even Gandhiji cautioned to carry on the path of truth. Yes, Professor Dhaneshwar Sausar was saying that Gandhiji when say truth reflects God or truth is God. And it's a very good assertion, I say, from the platform of even from the platform atheists also. It is acceptable. Whether you believe in God or not, immaterial. Practice truth. When Gandhi says truth is God, the focus is on truth, not on God. Even the atheists can practice this. They may disbelieve God immensely. At least practicing truth, they are in the path of morality. So the statement truth is God is so convincing and it is acceptable by all. But how far do we accept this? How far we practice this is a big question mark, and we all know the reality and truth behind the practice of truth. Now if we move to the second restraint of ahimsa. Now as we know, himsa is the weapon of the weak. It is the force of the brute. But we have forgotten our moral nature. We have forgotten our true nature. We become violent for silly cases. Why? Why there is aggression? You don't say even Duryodhana. If you look at Duryodhana, he was not a less learned man. He was even a learned man under an able guru Dronacharya. But why he was so arrogant? Why he was resorting to himsa? So this is a big question that we have to ask. We may be very much learned, we may be learned, but this element of aggression is not going away from us. We have not understood that violence breeds more violence. Even the greatest of wars have to succumb with a peace treaty, and that is non-violence. Why not go with the element of non-violence right from the beginning? Why not negotiations be carried on beforehand? After a lot of bloodshed, we understand, no, it is time to make peace. Why this? Why man has failed to realize this? Why have we developed so much of aggression, hatred, intolerance, animosity, envy among each other, among nations? So this is really a problem for all of us, for mankind in general. So the practice of non-violence is one of the greatest principles that can put one on the path of morality. But how far we are non-violent in our thoughts, speech and action is again a big question mark. Now if we go to Asteya, non-stealing. So Asteya, what it recommends? It recommends to procure the needs of life through righteous means. But what we have eyes on the other's property. We have the eyes on a big bungalow owned by somebody other. We have eyes on others, a good car. We have the tendency of exploiting others. We have the tendency of cheating when the time comes. Even during the time of pandemic, people have cheated. People have blackmailed things. So this is stealing. Stealing does not simply mean that I go enter somebody's house and take away an object. Even this is stealing. This stealing can be seen even in the corporate world. I was saying this somewhere else. Even in the corporate world, the lower member staff members, what they do, they are given with a project. They beautifully frame the project, and the manager, what he does is, he takes the project, he understands the project done by the lower member staff, and he takes the project and he gives the name that I have designed this project. And he gets promotions and all that. And this is also stealing. The lower members of staff, they have done the project, and you give your name to that. Is this not stealing? This is happening in the corporate world. And many cases like this are happening. How far we are aware in order to be moral? That's again a question mark. Then if we move to aparigraha, we are not focusing on the needs. We are focusing on the greeds. What are the greeds? The greeds are our desires. Okay, well, we have a desire. Well, if it is for the social good, well, it is good. But the desires are for the individual good. Okay, if you move step ahead, well, you have a desire, no problem, no issue. Let there be an end to the desire. But there is no end to desire. What is that? If I have a desire for something, I get it. The desire is not ending there. I have a desire for still higher one. I get up to that. I'm not ending up. I'm still thinking of a bigger one. So the desires in this chain lead to what is called as lobha. And if the desire is not fulfilled in some way, suppose you have a desire and it is not fulfilled, what it will lead to? It will lead to krodha, anger in you. Hey, I have a desire, I'm not getting this. My promotion is due, but I am not promoted. Anger. But if I am contented, well, I am promoted or not promoted, I'm least concerned. I have a profession of teaching, and there I enjoy, that's all. Well, but that's not happening. So, the desires lead to either lobha or krodha. So that is again dangerous. Now let me tell you a small story here in 1 or 2 minutes. There was a man with lot of wealth, uncountable money. He cannot even sit to count how much money he has. One day he was listening to a pravachana of a yogi. He said, you can take nothing to the other world. When you die, you have to leave everything here. Oh, tension arises in this man. Oh, I have built a big empire and I have to leave everything here. Oh, what will happen to this? So immediately he rushed to his office and held a meeting among the staff members and said, if anybody can suggest him how he can take this money, even then he dies, even though he dies, okay, even after death, he wants to take the money. Is there a way out? A number of answers were given to this man, but a peon comes forward and says, You see, I say knowledge, there is another stand. Knowledge is not required for a moral action. You see, this man, a peon, an uneducated man, he came with a solution. And it is something like this. He said to that rich man, that Karorpati, what you do when you go to America? How do you use your money? He said, I convert rupees into dollars. So he said, when you go to England, I convert rupees into pounds. And if you go to Japan, maybe a yen. So also, when you are here, convert all your wealth into dharma. Here, dharma is not religion. Dharma is punya karyas. Convert your property, your wealth into punya karyas, right deeds. Build hospitals. Build charity homes. Build old age homes. Support the needy. Have good schools, good colleges where the poor can study, high quality schools and colleges where the poor can study. So this is how you can convert your wealth into dharma, and having done this, even though you die, you will carry the punya with you. All the dharma that you have done through your punya karyas will be going with you. Number one. Number two, even though you don't believe, people may not believe that there is other world and they are carrying something to the other world. Even people don't believe, let them not. At the same time, the second assertion he comes with, even though you die, you will have a social immortality. You will become socially immortal for your deeds. The Tatas will become immortal for the hospitals, for the schools, the colleges that they have laid. So this is what we need to do. I don't say we can contribute to everybody. There is a lot of suffering around and we can help everybody. I'm not saying this. The idea here is we need to be contented with whatever we have. If something excess is there with us, we need to help somebody in need. There goes a saying, we cannot help everybody. We cannot help everybody. But everybody, I mean, each one of us can help somebody. If we do this, are you practicing this? If you are practicing, definitely it is the greatest contribution, because knowing the truth, we cannot help everybody, but we have the capability of helping somebody, and we are doing that when we are on the path of morality. This again reminds me of a lecture by Prafulla Mahapatra sir when he was addressing. He gave a lecture about a tsunami. After the tsunami, a child was walking along the seashore. Number of starfishes have come outside, and this poor guy was picking one by one starfishes and he was throwing into the sea. Somebody came to him and said, "Oh, can you save all these starfishes?" The child replied with a smile, "At least my activity will change the life of at least this starfish that I am picking into and putting into the sea." So that should be our objective. We cannot help out, but we can help someone. So if that we are doing, definitely we are on the path of morality. Now about brahmacharya, I'm not saying because of this paucity of time, and it's all about exercising control over our mind senses. So if we come to the niyama part, the observances, now we see the 5 observances. The saucha or the cleanliness, it recommends the body and the mental cleanliness. And it is having more of impact, and the modern man needs more of mental cleanliness. The modern man is very much, he wants to keep his body clean, and that part he is somehow convinced, but mental cleansing is somehow not happening, and that we should focus on. And then comes santosha. Santosha is contentment, and I have already said what is contentment: being satisfied with whatever we have. And again, saying this, we should not misunderstand that contentment means thinking that I am satisfied with whatever I have. I'm not going to do anything. because the observance of Santosa says, oh, you should be happy with what you are, why to do anything. No, I'm not prescribing to that view. I'm saying do your dharma, carry on your activities, carry the best that you can do, and having done your duty, whatever you have, whatever you don't have, be happy with that. That is the principle behind this. So you need to be contented every moment, every stage. So that would also land us somehow in the path of morality. Now again, tapaha, if you look at tapaha, it is all concerned about directing our mind not externally, rather internally. And this is all this human structure is about. It is focusing on the inner, not the outer. And if we move to Swadhyaya, it is the study of the scriptures. Well, we study scriptures, but we have understood the scriptures. We also say that. But how far do we practice those scriptures? We have seen number of so-called yogis behind the bars. They have studied a lot. But why they are behind the bars? Because they have not translated their knowledge into wisdom. They have not translated the wisdom into action. They know something, but they are acting in a different way. The knowledge is saying something, but the action is something else. So there is no parity. So Swadhyaya becomes meaningful only when the study of the scriptures have a bearing on the lives, the way we live, the way we behave, the way we treat others. So there lies the success of Swadhyaya. And finally, under the observances, if we look at Ishvara Pranidhana is, it helps to achieve a harmony in our cognitive and affective propensities that help us, I say at least in the path of morality. If at all divinity is ruled out here, at least it would help us to lead a moral life. So these are the basic structures. On this structure of Yama and Niyama, if we focus attention and see how far we are there in the society, we come up with a position wherein we find out that we have the knowledge, we have the understanding of the principles, but somehow I'm not able to practice those because of the societal conditions. What are the societal conditions? Because the society is not conducive for practicing those. Because the society has gone so rough. Somehow, if you practice truth, you will be proved as the man of untruth. Though finally, after say long struggle, you will be proved as true when your life is already nearly lost. So this is happening. The stories that are projected in films are not fake stories. They have reflections of a society. So even practice of truth, practice of ahimsa has become difficult. The understanding is there. But even though we wish to practice, the societal conditions are somehow barricading us. And maybe even if you take the society apart, in somehow even the man personally is also not guided by his own conscience. He is more or less carried away by the external conditionings that to which he is subjected to. So that is the problem, that is the situation that we are all in. There is no issue with the principles. We have good principles, very righteously defined principles. It's not a problem in understanding the principles. We have a very crystal clear understanding of the principles, but the problem lies in practicing. Well, from the own individual side, there is a problem in practice, or maybe because of the society, because the practice of truth or speaking the truth has become a problem in the society. So there lies the problem, and that is the biggest challenge. And how far we are out of this situation, how far we are able to keep assert ourselves in spite of all the contradictions that we find in the society. makes a defining feature of our moral nature. Now, having said all this, at least we can frame out in brief, some statements as to what would be a sort of moral nature, a defining moral characteristic of man. Now, let me enumerate them something like this. Firstly, well, if we are not doing any good to others, well, don't do. No harm in not doing good to anybody. But at least we should not harm anybody. Would we like to harm ourselves? We are not prepared to harm ourselves. If we are not prepared to harm ourselves, how do you feel like harming others? What right we have got to harm others? That we should focus on. That is, what we don't do to our own self, we should not do that thing to others. If we are not hating our own self, we should not develop a sense of hate towards others. Now, again, before carrying on an action, before saying something, think twice, thrice. Will this action or will this speech hurt anyone? Hurt anyone? If it hurts, and see whether such a statement, if spoken to you, hurts. If you say, yes, if this statement is said to me, it hurts. If this statement hurts you, how dare you to speak that statement to others if it's going to hurt others? So we need to think this. If this statement hurts you and you don't want this statement being passed on you, how do you think of this statement being passed on others? We should think about this. So the idea is, know yourself first before trying to know others or before trying to say something about others. So this is one thing. And in our lives, we need to love and respect everybody. Even the toughest of enemies, as Gandhiji said, there is nothing in hateism. Try to love even the enemy. Maybe someday even the enemy will succumb to your love. How much practical, I don't know, but Gandhiji has applied this in his life. And he's not a theoretical man, he was a man of action. And somehow this teaching is very vital. We need to respect others the way we respect. We need to love others the way we love our own self. If we do this, there would be a lot of social change around. So the message is, we need to treat all men around with fairness and justice. Now, what about the actions that we carry on and the actions that others carry? We need to evaluate every action of our own and others with the intention of the long range utility. What sort of utility that this action is going to produce? Whether it has got a long range utility, whether it qualifies the long range utility standard, and whether it has overcome, whether it has a standard of doing less evil. If we focus on this, maybe we can come closer and closer, and maybe we will be polishing on the moral status that is inherently there somehow, but somehow discovered. Maybe discovered will be opening up. And lastly, let me say, everybody in this creation seeks happiness. Even the animals, they don't want to be disturbed. They want to lead their lives in their own way. So everyone seeks happiness. But this happiness, as human beings, this happiness should not be self-centric. Rather, it should be society-centric, or it should be, say world-centric. And I don't know whether I would be right to say it should be cosmocentric, which our actions should be cosmocentric. Now here, talking of happiness, reminds me of a famous quote by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. I'm not exactly quoting his lines, but I am trying to say what he has said. He He said, it is not important how much happy you are, because everybody wants to be happy and you are happy, it's all right. It is not important how much happy you are. The importance lies in how many are happy because of you. The importance is how many are happy because of you. And if this becomes our aim, and this becomes our aim and objective, that is the objective of making others happy. As I said, we cannot help everybody. I also say here, let us start with making the people, at least in our family, happy. We come across families where the elders are not treated, the elders are not happy. The elders are kept in old age homes, they are sent to old age homes. So, at least for them, I say, see the happiness in the elders, at least in your parents. It will definitely move a tear in your eye that defines your happiness. I'm not talking of big ideals. Start sharing happiness with the people around. Start with your own family. As your self-evolve may evolve, start with your own individual society. And this may expand. Try to see your happiness in the happiness of others. So if this becomes the model, and how do we do this? How can we achieve this? Seeing happiness in others. We can make others happy through our acts of love, care, share, charity, compassion, even our own self-discipline, respect, kindness, etc., for others. Now, this would then, finding happiness, own happiness in the happiness of others, this would definitely, I say with a strong conviction, that this would definitely give enough opportunity for an individual to rise above the ordinary ways of living, to lead a life of purity and discipline. In such a life, there is a balance, there is a proper harmony in his thought, speech, and action. Because his concern, his focus is on the happiness of others. How can he make a hate speech? How can he wrongly think of others? How can he behave wrongly? How can he act wrongly? So, this ideal of happiness, finding happiness in others, and seeing own happiness in the happiness of others, if this is practiced, I think we can think of, at least, I don't know how far we would be successful, but it is a human possibility. We can do this. At least we can start with the happiness in our own individual families. So the question is, again, can we lead such a life of finding ourselves in others? Can we find other selves in our own self? Can we make this transition? Now, a sequel to this, again, leads us back to the original question. A sequel to this, again, lands us to the original question: is man moral? And it is now for all of us to decide and answer. Because we differ in our ways, everybody has his own understanding, has his own standpoints, and he can take his life his own way, trying his own ways of finding happiness in others. So he has the option to exercise how he wants to see his happiness, say happiness just in himself, or happiness in others, to search his happiness in others, how he wants to lead a life. It's again a human question, and again it is up to all of us to decide and answer. Thank you, sirs. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Namaskar.
Uh, many thanks.
Sir, may I ask a question?
All right, you will ask definitely. Let me give a brief exposition of his main ideas, and then, sir, you are free to ask. All are free to ask their questions. Now, I really enjoyed your talk. Each man moral. So it was really illuminating. And of course, while discussing moral issues, so many problems will arise. Firstly, sometimes we face moral conflicts. Despite all our good intentions, moral conflicts become a part of life. So how to tide over a moral problem? That is a very important issue in dealing with moral questions. Suppose, let me cite an example, a personal example. I know a friend. His parents are very conservative. Parents do not want that his son should marry an intercaste. But the son is very progressive minded, does not believe in any caste system because it is discriminating. So he has a moral problem. Should he go by his own conscience to violate the caste system so that in long future a casteless society may emerge, or should he satisfy his parents and abide by the dictates of his parents? Moral questions, thousands of moral questions confront us in our practical situations of life. That is another thing. So we can take a broader perspective. We should not make others unhappy. The son knows that his parents will be unhappy if he marries in some caste. So he, in this situation, and there are hundreds of situations we experience in practical life where there is moral conflict. Then what gives motivation to a man to lead a moral life? There are also diverse questions, that there are diverse motivations, different motivations that guide our life, in our practical life, to lead it to be moral or not to be moral in a situation. And as we grow in age and experience, we find that every moral value that society has prescribed, or there is in society, it has its own possible limitation. No moral value can be taken as ultimate or final. The deontological view of morality is subject to be questioned. Then anyway, the crisis in scriptures, the crisis in historical situations, and crisis also in practical life. Now, so similarly, there is another belief. Should one have faith in God to be a moral person, or God has nothing to do with morality? This is also another important question, that to what extent one can lead a moral life without being a believer of God. One can say, yes, one can be an atheist and lead a moral life. There is nothing wrong in it. But to what extent he can practice atheism in all situations of life when there will be new challenges, new problems? So these are some of the pertinent questions that come to my mind. But something I enjoyed, that we may not do any good to others. We may not do any good to others, but at least we will not do any harm to anybody. This is one of the finest moral values that should be one of the guiding values of our life. I am standing while passing going through the road. I find that there is a blind man trying to cross in the road. I am not compelled to help him so that he can easily go to other side in a traffic. But if I stop for a while, help the blind man to cross the road, that is a very important thing, a moral act that I do in that particular situation. But if I do not do it, I will not be taken into task. But if I do it some good work to him. And from this small example, we can extend it to many spheres of human life. So, and at the same time, one important thing you highlighted, sir, that you need to respect every human being as a dignified person. Once we accept this, that every human being has a right to life with dignity, then perhaps we can solve most of our moral values or moral crises, moral problems. So, similarly, how many are happy with you? In a situation, there are situations when many people become unhappy if you do something. Many people were unhappy with Socrates. Many people were unhappy with Jesus Christ. Even many people were unhappy with Mahatma Gandhi. Still, what they have done, they are great examples in human history who have shown us some moral path. So, some of my stray ideas while listening to your talk, some of these ideas came to my mind and I put it. Now the discussion is open for it is now open for discussion. Any friend, any colleague can put some question and our learned friend will try to answer. Okay, sir. Okay, sir. You can put your question.
May I ask?
Yes, you ask.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Rao, and also the enlightening response by the Professor Ganesh. I think that you concentrated more on how to be moral. Assume that man is moral. The most important question comes, why to be moral? In the end, when you talk about the social issues which hinder your moral activity, then the question comes, why to be moral? And again, when you stress on the yama and niyama to help in moral living, why not you think about creating a moral order which may help in practicing morality? The situation in which we are, the question is, if morality is not paying, if honesty is not paying, why to be moral? And why not? Or the choice is why to live by the moral conventions of the society. So I think the question of why to be moral and the question of how to create a moral order, moral social order, I think they need to be stressed more in your presentation, your response, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Namaskar, sir. Thank you very much.
Namaste, sir. Namaste, sir.
Namaskar, sir. Thank you very much for your question, because why to be moral is definitely an interesting question, because as I said during the course of my lecture, that having said of the yama and niyama, the restraints and the observances that one needs to have in his life, and he wants to be using those in his life. He wants to be truthful. He wants to be non-violent. But when he comes to the actual real life situations, he faces situations where the applicability of the principles, the cardinal values, become so difficult. You are truthful to the core, but you are proved wrong, because the society is guided by falsity. So there lies the problem in Professor Alok Tandon, and there rises a question: why to be moral? Yes, definitely there arises a question, but we need to elevate from this. Well, we may be bounded by a lot of falsity. We may be bounded by a lot of contradictory situations. There is a learning in us. There is an inner voice in us, and we have to go by it. And that's why the practice of truth, the practice of ahimsa, was so nicely taken and was practically taken. And it's a human possibility also. If we look at the works of Gandhi, he fought against the mighty Britishers by the technique of truth and non-violence. He wanted to arrive at the truth, and the means was non-violence, and he succeeded. There were, yes, Professor Dhaneshwar Sahu was saying, yes, there will be opposition. Yes, there will be opposition, but there is nothing wrong in going the right way. And maybe the right ways that we practice, the observances, the restraints, if they are carried on in our lives in a true sense, definitely would have a bearing. And for that we need a moral courage. This moral courage is not coming out. Irrespective of the consequences, irrespective of what others think, irrespective of what the society is, there is nothing wrong to be moral. Let the society go its own way. Yes, the problem with the modern mind, as I said in my lecture also, we are more concerned about the external. We are less concerned about the internal. We are more concerned about what others speak and less concerned about what we think. If I think, or if we think that the practice of these ideals would secure a good life of the society, of others, including the own self, there is nothing wrong in it. There is a tussle. You see, even though you do a wrong deed, you are questioned. Even though you do a right deed, you are questioned. People will question both the ways. If you have done something good, there will be people who will be attacking you. Maybe out of anger, out of jealousy, I don't know. But there are people who will be attacking. That's why even Gandhi, a person like Gandhiji, had a lot of opposition, had to face a lot of opposition. And going the wrong way, why to be moral? If you have a question, why to be moral, and going the wrong way, and the society is already there. We have a society. And we as thinkers, at least, we should come up with, yes, to think on why to be moral. And maybe we are the people, at least because of certain class of people being there who think on these practices, maybe we have a social order. Otherwise, this might have gone to a state of a bigger animal world, and that has not gone to. That means the morality is there. There are moral practices, and we do practice, we do observe the moral principles, but we are not committed the way we should have as a sense of an ideal. We practice truth, but we are not 100% to that. We practice maybe around 70, 80, maybe I'm not, I should not give a numerical addition to this, but I should not do that, but the degree, I'm talking of the degree. We know that we should be truthful, and we know the positivity in truth. We know the positivity in ahimsa. Even the modern societies have failed to realize that violence, war, they'll be destroying us. And they all succumb to peace. Why? Because that is the inner call of man. And that's why we need to be moral. So maybe this is my understanding. You go either way. You have questions around you. You practice yama niyama. You are strict to that, even though you have opposition to that. So that's my submission, sir. Thank you for your questions, sir. Yes. Yes, Professor Ghosh has something to say. Professor Ghosh.
Ranjit, there was some question. Ranjit.
Thank you, Professor Sahu. Now, as Professor Tandon said, we just cannot establish a moral, social moral order. Okay, so disturbance, some type of disturbance is taking place. Okay, you know, as societies differ, we just cannot find out a cohesive single social moral order, because morality, which is something which is a byproduct of human rationality, as well as it is a byproduct of society. Man cannot but be moral, because even Darwin, in his theory of natural selection, has given certain qualities of human beings which subscribes to this view that man cannot but be moral. Now, the question of putting human beings into one type of social order is just not possible. Okay, because societies differ. But Dr. Rao has given a very important conclusion to his speech, which he took from the spirit of dharma in Mahabharata. Mahabharata discusses so many dharmas, but the only dharma that is the most supreme one is this: I should not do something to others which I would not like to do it to myself by others. So this is the most important moral principle, which is, if it can be taken as a principle of social moral order, then it's all right. But I think the moral social order cannot be established, because its violation will differ from society to society, and the violations also will differ. I don't think that whether it is properly audible to you. If you have got anything sensible, you please answer.
There was some audio disturbance from your side, but from what I could get from your question is, from you is roughly something like this. You take the case of Darwin's idea of natural selection, where the question of morality, that what I was talking of, is somehow missing, and maybe you are more close to support to that sort of view. I don't know, because the voice was not that clear. So having said this, why at all morality that we practice? The only thing that I would like to suggest is that we have traveled long from the consideration of I to we. We have made a transition from I to we, and from we to say, and here the definition of we has expanded over the time, from the individual family to the society to the world to the cosmos. So the I to we transition that has taken place, and this transition is somehow not complete. I say it's partial, and there lies the problem. What is this? What is this problem? The problem is not expanding myself to the others. In saying this, what I mean is the pain, the suffering, the problems that I have in my lives under a given set of conditions, those are the problems even of others who are around me, maybe the members in my own family or in the society where I live. And the question is, have I understood the pain or the suffering in myself? I say my understanding is not complete if I have not understood the suffering, the pain in others. Morality, the transition to the moral fold, lies in understanding the suffering, the pain in others. You have a pain, you have a suffering, no issue, let us be silent. Think of the similar pain in others. Do we have a focus on that? Are we concerned about the pain that the family members are having? The problems that our own individual members in the family are passing through? So that understanding, I think, at least in a lower group, would make us or enable us to find our own self in others, and that would build in a sort of unity and build in a sort of moral order, which practically we are not seeing. So that is the problem that you have. And if I take a hint from Professor Dhaneshwar Sahu sir, he was citing the example of a child who wants to go for intercaste marriage and the parents are not happy with that. Yes, but you see, if we look into the mindset of the parents, they have a loving heart for the children. Whatever the children do, they excuse, they forget and forgive. It is the children, in the modern society, the children who give a negative face to the parents. They don't understand the sentiments. The parents are not denying the intercaste marriage here. Well, they are saying you should have not done that. And what it is happening is the new generation, they are not trying to convince the parents as to how his decision is not going wrong. Rather, the modern generation, what they are doing is, because they have already acquired a lot of property, lot of money, and they are least concerned about the sayings of the parents. What they are doing is, they are giving a throw to the parents. Let them be in their own world. I want to be in my own world. So this is what is happening. And that's why various questions do arise. But there is still a human possibility that it may take time, that this very child should have taken an attempt to convince the parents, because the parents are never hard-cooked. They don't have a stone heart. They have a melting heart. Parents are like coconuts. They have a very hard shell outside, but they have a very sweet and soft inside, the fruit. So this is what the modern generation is failing to understand. This sort of modern people can even make their parents happy, to break the hardcore of the parents and to see the sweetness of the parents inside. And the parents are always ready to melt down. And this is how I define myself. And maybe many can come to this. I say this can be practiced, and this is a human possibility which cannot be denied. The only thing is, because of the financial gains that the modern generation is having, because of the distance factor, because they are staying these days, the modern children are staying not with the parents, they are staying miles away, and they are least concerned about the parents. So there lies the problem. there lies a duality. Even the parents can be convinced, they can also be taken with your intercaste marriage. That is possible, and I have come across cases where that is also possible, and the parents are always there to forget and forgive. And we need to realize this too. So the problem lies in
Please be
finding
brief.
the hard core and not going into the deep core. The problem lies in the external manifestation and we are not going inside. So there lies the problem. This practice is possible. This is my submission. It's a human possibility. It's not that we cannot practice this. Well, we don't. Well, we have a society where this practice is failing. I do understand. I do understand the social condition, but this is a human possibility. We can convince. We can find out our own happiness in the happiness of the parents, and we have a capability and ability to convince the parents, and the parents are, nobody is more friendly than our own parents. So this is my
Dr. Rao, Dr. Rao, we are actually confronting here the exercise of choice by the person concerned, the boy and the parents. So this conflicting choice, whose choice will be ultimately, we do not know, because the parents, they will exercise their choice, and so also the person who is going to get married, he is trying to exercise his choice. So there is a conflict of choices between the parents and the child. So in this case, how would you say that we can resolve the conflict?
Yes,
I'm
I
sorry,
understand.
it is disturbed. My person is disturbed.
Yes, I understand. The boy cannot marry both the girls. He cannot marry both, but at least he can come to a table of understanding between the parents. They can sit down together. They can chalk out the plan. They can see the pros and cons on both the sides and reach an understanding rather than kicking the parents away and taking a decision. Maybe in the process of negotiation, maybe I say maybe, the child also finds that he is on the wrong side, maybe he succumbs to what his parents say, maybe, or even the parents get convinced that the selection that is made by his son is a better selection because it is his life which he has got to lead, and it is his interest that we need to see rather than, okay, if so, I mean to say a sort of negotiation can be done. It is possible because he cannot go with both the girls. He has to marry one. But a sort of negotiation can be done rather than infighting within the family. This is my submission. This is possible.
All right. Pramod Babu. Pramod Babu.
Yes, sir. So the question is each man moral. That was the title of the paper. Why this question? This is a question for human being only. We don't say each dog moral, each God moral. No. Man is a rational animal, and he is asked whether he is moral or not. The question is between order and disorder. We see there is cosmic order and there is no choice. We don't have any choice about cosmic order. We just follow the cosmic order. If there is raining, there is raining. If there is heat, there is heat. If there is the change of the seasons, the change is there. We have to accept that order. So order should be accepted. We don't ask any question regarding cosmic order. But when the question of a moral order comes, we exercise our choice. Because man is selfish. There beautifully Dr. Rao explained that we have to transform ourselves from the I sense to we sense. And I shall say, as we can't ask any question regarding cosmic order, similarly there are certain cardinal values which has no choice at all. Can you think that there is any substitute of ahimsa? Can we accommodate hinsa anyway? Can anybody appreciate hinsa? So ahimsa is the cardinal value. It is a value both in theory and practice. You can't say that in practical of life I need to be violent. No, violence is not desirable. Similarly, love, sacrifice, there are certain cardinal values which we have to follow without asking that, as we do not ask question regarding the cosmic order. So there is no, as Alok Tandon sir said, that we should focus on the moral orders. Moral orders are already there. Jama, Niyama, these are the moral orders. They are prescribed in the Vedas and Upanishads. These orders are there. But the question is, what is the human crisis? The crisis is his own rationality. Because man is rational, man is able to understand the moral values, and at the same time, man is free to misuse his freedom. So whether man is using his freedom or misusing his freedom, it is because of his rational ability. So man is rational enough to exercise his free will. So if I am misusing my freedom, if I am becoming immoral anyway, I am doing it voluntarily, deliberately, by my own choice. Even at the risk, I am becoming immoral at my own risk. So my humble submission is that we shall stick to the order, any order, cosmic order, moral order. And in the long run, we shall be benefited. We may be cheated by this action or that action, by
Pramodao,
this person or that
please
person.
be brief. Please be brief.
Yes. I am speaking only one sentence. We have to follow the order, whatever may be its consequences. We may be cheated by this person or that person, by this event or that event, but in long run, truth will triumph and moral order will persist. Thank you.